Good evening and welcome everyone to Planning Committee for Major Applications A. Before we start the meeting, I have a few housekeeping announcements to make. First of all, we don't have a planned fire alarm test today, so if you do hear fire alarm, unfortunately we will need to leave the building. It is an unlikely event, but just to be prepared, if that does happen, there will be stewards to advise you how to leave the building. It is likely that it will be through the entrance that you came into the building, and the point where we all meet is about 100 metres down the road, that way at St John's Churchyard. But again, there will be stewards available in that unlikely eventuality. Hopefully you will have found where the public toilets are. So if you go out of these doors and for the corridor that's opposite, and then turn left, you'll find the toilets for both the gents and the ladies down that corridor. If you need refreshments, the waiting area where you were probably sat before you came into the meeting, there are some refreshment machines there for you as well. Can I ask everybody, if you do have a mobile phone, please do switch it to silent or turn it off altogether if you can bear to do that. This meeting is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. The microphone in this meeting room is for public record, so please do not say anything into a microphone that you would not like to be in the public domain. Members of the public are welcome to film, audio record, photograph, or post about the public proceedings of the meeting, but please, if you do choose to do so, please be considerate towards other people in the room and take care not to disturb proceedings. Also, if you're taking any photos or any filming, please do only point your cameras towards this end of the room and not take photos of other people in the because we don't have permission for everybody in this room to be filmed. So, but anybody sitting at this end of the room, clearly there is permission for that. You're welcome to use the council's free Wi-Fi service. There is no longer a password, so you should be able to get into that fairly straightforwardly if you need to do that. During the meeting, members of this committee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of this meeting. Send or receive emails, text messages, or social media posts concerning the business of the committee, and that's so that it's very clear that anything that's decided in this room, everything is in the public domain and people are aware on the basis we are making decisions. I'd also like to remind speakers to use the microphone whenever you're speaking, and please do speak close to the microphones. These are relatively new microphones which aren't quite as good at picking up sound as the old ones. So please do make sure you're speaking relatively close to the microphone when you're addressing the meeting. And please don't put any mobile devices close to the microphones because it does tend to create interference, which can be unpleasant for people in the room, particularly if they're people who have hearing difficulties. Apologies, I've got apologies for slight lateness from Councillor Merrill, who is on his way but will be with us very shortly, and certainly we will be here before we start the main item on development management on this agenda. In fact, here he is. So in that case, what I'd like to do is confirm the voting members of this committee. So I will start, and then I will, as he just got here, I'll turn to Councillor Merrill. I'm Councillor Richard Livingstone. I'm Councillor for Old Kent Road Ward, and I'm chair of this committee.
Yeah, apologies, Chair. Yeah, I'm Councillor Darmel.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Emily Tester for North Bermondsey Ward.
Councillor Kath Whittam for Rotherhithe Ward and the Vice Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Gavin Edwards, Nunhead and Queen's Road Ward.
Councillor Popular Nunhead.
Good evening, Chair. I'm Councillor Catherine Rose from Dulwich Wood Ward.
And welcome, Councillor Rose, to your first meeting of planning. So,
Rudely interrupted for about 4 or 5 years.
Thank you. And so those are all the voting members of this committee. Notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. So we have had an addendum report, a short addendum report that has been circulated to members of committee and is in the public domain. We do also have had circulated a set of the slides which will be presented to the meeting as well. Disclosures of interest and dispensations. Any member wish? Thank you. That's thank you, Councillor. You're absolutely right. I do usually introduce the officers, so I'm going to start with Colin, then we'll go that way. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Colin Wilson, Assistant Director for Strategic Development.
I'm Claire Nevin. I'm a barrister practicing at Francis Taylor Building. I'm acting as advisor to the.
Hello, I'm Gerald Gola. I'm the committee clerk.
Good evening, Dipesh Patel, Head of Strategic Applications. Good evening, Alex Cameron, a team leader in the planning department.
Good evening, I'm Michael Sakaris. I'm Head of Design, Conservation and Transport.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Reggie, for highlighting that. So, Councillor Papula. Disclosures of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare an interest or dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be considered at this meeting? Thank you. That brings us to consider the minutes of the meeting that we held on the 29th of April. Our committee happy to approve those minutes? Thank you. That brings us to development management items on the agenda. So the next item of business concerns the determination of planning applications. So first of all, I'd like to remind everyone on the committee about the guidance of how we carry out business. First of all, officers will present the report, outline the recommendations and answer questions raised by the committee. Secondly, if present and wishing to speak, the following may then address the committee for no more than 3 minutes each. First of all, one spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. By now, you will need to have identified a spokesperson, or if more than one objector wishes to speak, identified how you wish to use that 3-minute time slot between you. Secondly, we'll hear from the applicant or the applicant's agent. Thirdly, a spokesperson representing any supporters of the application who live within 100 metres of a development site. And fourthly, a ward councillor representing the area affected by the proposal. Ward members in attendance, those nominated to speak on behalf of objectors, supporters and applicants, should sit as far forward in this room as possible in the audience area. That's for ease of communication with the committee and the speaker. That's particularly important for the applicants, because quite often we find issues arise later on a committee where we need to have some to and fro discussions with the applicant. Need further clarification. However, I do want to remind people that we only have those slots available for people that are in the public area to participate in the meeting. It's not an opportunity to take part in the general debate of the committee. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspects of the proposal and should avoid repeating information which is already in the report. Again, this meeting is not a hearing where all the participants present evidence that is then cross-examined by other participants. At the end of each representation, the committee may then ask questions of the presenter. Speakers should lead the committee to subjects on which they'd welcome further questioning. That's probably particularly important if you think that 3 minutes is not going to be enough to get all your points across. You may want to flag up the key issues that you want to raise and invite committee members to ask you follow-up questions on those things if you think the 3 minutes won't be sufficient. After receiving all the submissions, the committee will debate the application and consider the recommendations. This is a council committee meeting, which is open to the public, but there shouldn't be any interruptions to its proceedings from the audience. Finally, I'd like everyone present to know, although this planning committee comprises of members from different political parties, none of us here are politically whipped to vote in any particular way on these matters. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy, and are based on information contained within the relevant reports, together with consultation responses and any submissions that we hear today. How we approach these applications set out in Development Management Report, item 6 on the agenda. And if members are happy to note that report, we will then move on to considering the planning applications themselves. Are members happy to note that report? Thank you. That brings us on to the main item of today's business, which is Aylesbury Estates site, phase 2B, land bound by Thurlow Street, Albany Road, Kinglake Street and Bagshot Street. And that's set out in pages 13 to 166 of the agenda pack, and also pages 1 to 4 of the addendum report. And I'd like to turn to, I think it's Dipesh and Alex to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the application before you, as mentioned, is for phase 2B of the Aylesbury estate. The proposal is for redevelopment of the buildings in the area and the site area of the 640 new homes to include 173 social rent homes, 89 intermediate homes spaces, and a new Bagshot Park, which would so this slide just shows the site context and boundaries. So on the bottom left is the land phasing diagram for the Aylesbury, open spaces on the top left, and with some photographs of the streets and in and around. Just a slide here to show the existing building heights. The highest buildings, as members will know, is along Thurlow Street, with heights there. In terms of heritage assets, there are some heritage assets. There are fairly distal from the site. You can see in red the conservation areas. There's the listed Chumley Gardens. The proposal doesn't cause any harm to those. In terms of the proposal itself, a series of buildings are proposed, mostly sort of 8 and 10 stories. The tower building that you can see there on the corner of Thurlow Street and Albany Road would be 26 stories, with heights reducing from there, as I mentioned, public park and Bagshot Park. There'll also be a new public space on Thurlow Street. That would be more of an urban square. And this has resulted in schemes come about following amendments to the fire regulation. I'll just go on to, at this point, the addendum. So we've clarified in the addendum, paragraph 4, that the council have a development agreement with the applicant, Nottingham Genesis, to deliver the redevelopment of the Aylesbury estate. And the development agreement can be varied depending on the planning strategy. Point 5 just corrects a point made by councillors Harper and Foster for the meeting where the previous iteration of this scheme was considered on 17th January 23. They just wanted their concerns about the speed of regeneration, the quantity and sincerity of the consultation noted. So that's noted through the addendum. Following the publication of the report, council officers have been further discussing matters about floor space with colleagues in Southwark Construction. We've cross-checked the figures used in the calculation of existing floor space. I'll come onto a slide in the presentation on that. But there's a slight discrepancy that's been found. So instead of the just under 500 square meters additional social rent floor space, we've worked out that it would be actually 5 square meters, just over 105 square meters. Importantly, there'd still be an uplift space with the plan. And also just noting that the floor space calculations have been checked throughout the course of the application, and the data has been verified by colleagues in the addendum also notes some of the corrections to some of the factual information in the report, and just some amendments to the planning obligations, which to read through. In terms of the plot extent themselves, Side there you can see 4A and 4D would be the perimeter block where the tower would be located, and 4B is a C-shaped block. So that would be phase one of this development. That would be delivered first, with the blocks on 5A and 5C being delivered as phase two. So, as we mentioned in the officer report, the OPP is a relevant consideration.
Sorry, Dipesh, could you speak a little bit closer to the microphone?
Sorry.
Indications.
Is that better? Yes. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. So the OPP is a material consideration. We've looked at the principles in the OPP in assessing this application. So the key routes, and this site would have a key route going from east to west as identified in the OPP, the outline planning permission, and that would be maintained through the scheme. One of the other key principles was about public open spaces. Again, two sites there that you can see identified within the red line for open space, again, have been carried through on this current proposal. Importantly and beneficially, those open spaces are larger than was envisaged through the OPP. In terms of housing and tenure mix, as you can see on the left of the slide there is blocks 4. So phase one of the developments, which come forward first, they contain most of the social rent homes, so they would be delivered ahead of they would be delivered first, with most of the intermediate being delivered in phase 2. In terms of the proposing housing tenure, sorry, this is quite a bit busy slide. I'm happy to take questions on this later. But as I mentioned before, the information has been checked during the course of the application, and that has been updated. The information provided in the report was based on the most recent data from housing database, which was validated. I mentioned the discrepancy. Some of the comments received have been about whether Foxcote, which has been demolished, should be included in the floor space calculation. That has not been included in this floor space calculation. That's because Foxcote was demolished before this application was submitted, so it wasn't existing floor space at the time. We've discussed that with colleagues at the GLA. They haven't raised it in their in their stage 1 report to us, and we as officers are comfortable that it meets the requirements of the London Plan H8 in that respect. But importantly, there would be a significant uplift in homes, both compared to the existing and the OPP, and including an uplift in affordable homes on the site. So in terms of the proposed housing, the majority of the family homes would be in the affordable tenure, with 49 4-bedroom social rent homes, 11 5-bedroom social rent homes to meet the real need for larger family homes in this area. Slide of the ground floor layout. Most of the homes would be dual aspect, which we'll come on to. The homes, the 2 blocks there on the left, would have podium play space and amenity areas with parking. Again, there's another slide for that later on. So in terms of the dwelling mix and housing quality, there'd be very good quality of accommodation, high percentage of dual aspect homes, very high percentage in the social rents as well, with a good percentage of the affordable homes being family homes. In terms of the building heights, the heights around most of the proposal are 1 story more than the OPP parameter plan, except for the towers, which is 6 stories higher, and the impact of that has been assessed and tested in some of the views that come. This is the view from Burgess Park, showing the site rendered there, and on the left is the heights of the parameter plan for the rest of the OPP. View closer from Burgess Park to the site. and then a view south looking along Thurlow Street. So the area you can see in the front foreground is Thurlow Square, the sort of urban, so that's harder landscapes area in front with some shops there. And sort of zoomed in view of Thurlow Square in that area. View south along Albany Street. And this is a view of Bagshot Street west through the new park. And another, of Thurlow Square. Just go through the slides and view from and Mina Road and Kinglake Streets. In terms of open space, the proposal would provide just short of 8,000 square metres of open space. The two public open spaces would account to around 3,700 square metres, Thurlow Square and Bagshot Park, and the rest would be as communal space for residents. In terms of public realm and landscaping, the applicants have optimised greening on the site, around the housing blocks and on the podiums and open spaces. They've managed to achieve a urban greening factor of 0.393, which is very slightly below the Mayor's target of 0.4. And the reason for not quite getting to 0.4 is partly to do with the place-based requirements. So the developments would meet all of the place-based requirements for all children, including importantly 12 plus children, where the play space would be provided mostly at Bagshot Park. And as a function of providing that play space, the amount of area is limited in terms of the greening possibilities, and they've maximised that. And we think that is a sensible balance to be struck. In terms of trees, the slide on the left shows the trees that aren't filled in are the trees that will be retained, and the trees that are coloured and filled in are the new trees that are planted. And the slide on the right shows the trees on site. So the larger plane trees on Thurlow Street would be retained, but some of the smaller trees shown dashed outline, they would be the ones that would be lost. So a total of 28 trees would be lost, but there'd be an increase of over 100 trees on the site. For transport, servicing would be provided as per the diagram there. So there's options for deliveries to come within the site. And in terms of cycle parking, this would be at ground level and on the basement. Car parking is proposed. There would be some car parking, 31 blue badge spaces, 46 spaces for general needs. This would be for returning social rent tenants, and 6 car club. In terms of daylight and sunlight, the extensive testing has been undertaken. There are a limited number of properties that would be affected. Here, to the on the slide, it's called the APF development, which is 1 Haywood Street. That was designed with the Aylesbury OPP in mind. Most of the windows there, while the proportional reduction would be quite high, most of the windows would retain VSCs of more than 18. And for 47 to 59 Bagshot Streets, again, while the proportional reductions would be fairly high, because of the open nature of the sort of aspects they have at the moment, the resultant or the residual VSCs would be more than 22%. This slide goes on to show some of the other properties on Bagshot Road, that would be affected. All of these homes have relatively high VSCs at the moment, and all the retained VSCs would be more than 50%. These homes are also dual aspects. And for Faversham, again, while there'd be a high proportional reduction, VSCs would be more than 17%, and for Wolverton, which is envisaged to be Part 2C, the reductions would be between 21 and 9%. Bar 9 windows which are opened by balconies, Or without the balconies, the VSCs would be 17% or less. In terms of wind, in the summer, pretty good in terms of wind conditions around the site. In the winter, it gets a little bit windier on the southwestern part, but still very good conditions around the site for walking. So in summary, the site and the proposal would provide 640 new homes with 50% affordable housing in line with the requirements in the plan, 10% wheelchair accessible, significant carbon savings, and a payment of just £500,000 to take it up to 100%. And the things you can see there. So officers recommend the application for approval. I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Dipesh. Questions from members of the committee? Councillor Tester and then Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. That was a really helpful presentation. I have one sort of small point of clarification, and then I can do a question after everyone else has gone as well. On page 11 of the report, the presentation, I noticed and appreciate it's a really big table on the top section about units, the centre one proposed. I think there's a typo. So I think it's meant to be 262, not 2,628. So I just wanted to check that that was correct and that I could take off that 8. Well, yeah, that would be better. But yeah, I just wanted to check that that was the case. Thank you.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you for spotting that.
Councillor Edwards. Was it? Well done. You're both eagle-eyed today, so. Yeah, sorry, Councillor Edwards, I'm not sure your microphone's on.
Sorry, apologies. Did you hear me then? Yeah.
Yes, that's based on the number of dwellings, but on
Got it.
capital rooms, it's 50.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Papula.
Cheers, Chair. I've got a question with regards to the Foxtrot aspect. Of course, it's been noted already that you stated the reason as to why it wasn't included is because it's been demolished already. But correct me if I'm wrong. But I thought that the London plan mentioned specifically that anything part of the development state should be included as opposed to the existing stock. So therefore, in theory, we should be considering Foxtrot when we are calculating these figures. I think it's policy HAD. So there's nothing that mentions existing housing, but rather it mentions the development state which Foxtrot would constitute part of. So if that is correct, then overall wouldn't the development be a net loss?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, if you then go on to paragraph 4.85 of policy H8 of the London plan, it has a helpful explanation about what counts as existing floor space on an estate for the purposes of the reports where we've counted the existing space. And it says that for the purposes of this policy, existing affordable housing floor space includes both occupied and vacant floor space, regardless of the current condition of stock. So the policy is designed around existing on site as you're considering the application, and any vacant space, because there was an issue historically with councils emptying space it being in a poor condition, and then saying, well, we won't count that for the purpose of redevelopment estates. So what H8 set out to do was to say that in counting floor space, you count things which are there, which is Dipesh's point, rather than counting buildings which no longer exist.
I just, before you do, I had a similar question about the Foxcote issue, which is that just to understand, so if we look at slide 4, there is a diagram which shows a sort of ghost outline of the old Foxcote building, which overlaps with the corner of 1 Hayward Street. So I'm assuming that Foxcote was demolished, presumably under the planning permission, which gave permission to build 1 Hayward Street. So just to understand if that's the case. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So for people who are not as familiar with the Aylesbury as some other people in the room, yeah, there were originally sort of 3 blocks between Ravenstone and Wendover, Winslow, Padcote, and Foxcote, the southern of Winscote. So as you can see there, there's kind of an outline of where that used to be, which overlaps with. So yeah, I don't know if anybody's got an answer.
I think even if you would take the view that that should be counted, as your point, what that's sorry. So one of the things that we've had a look at is even if you were to not take the approach which I think is set out in London Plan Policy H8, but were to include Foxcote, Alex has gone through the process of looking at the planning application which was built on that site, and looked at, well, okay, how many houses were lost and then gained. And this is to Richard's point about where would that net off. Alex?
We looked at floor space rather than habitable rooms, but I think ultimately, if you were to include Foxcote, but the floor space that was delivered under the APF at 1 Hayward Street, there'd be a net loss of 47 square meters across the site.
Okay, so it was a slight reduction across the site. Okay. Councillor Papula, sorry, I'll allow you to come back.
Yeah, no, that's completely fine. No, so I think from the face of it, it does. I think the London Plan makes it quite clear that Foxco really should be. Maybe we can take legal counsel on this, but I do believe that Foxco should be counted in the calculation, and if that's the case, it would then be a, and therefore would be London Plan. So I just wanted to know that and maybe get counsel. And I've got another question, if that's all right, Chair.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow officers to because obviously they might need to do a bit of research thinking about this one, unless you want to answer it now, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we share a different view about the interpretation of H8, but I appreciate where you're coming from, Councillor Papula. In terms of would it be in breach of that particular policy? Yes, if by our calculation, by a relatively small amount, 47 square meters. So then what you would be doing is what this committee always does, which is balance the thing against all the other policies, which we feel it is meeting, including the considerable delivery of affordable housing on this scheme. So as you know, as a regular planning committee, the failure to meet one part of a policy doesn't necessarily mean we would recommend something to be refused to you. And obviously what we're always looking at is the degree to which it might fail that policy. And even taking the view that Foxcote should be included, that failure is a relatively modest one, 40 square meters.
Dipesh.
I mean, the policy read as a whole looks at whole estate regeneration and the effects of that on social housing. So if we were to look at that, I think something of relevance would be the homes that the council have bought as council homes on the FDS side. So on FDS A, I think we have purchased yes, 36 homes were purchased as to be council homes, and then 244 on FDS B as well. So looking at that as an aggregate, I think the floor space calculation, if we were to include box codes at the on Hayward Street and look at the homes on the FDS, social rent homes will have been, the floor space will have been increased.
Councillor Fuller.
But if we factor that in, that would be outside of what we're speaking about right now, because it does sound like they're complaining two schemes in order for us to then be proposed. That's what it sounds like to me in terms of purchase of homes that was just mentioned. But we can speak about this far more in detail later. If that's right. So
that sounds like it's a point for discussion later on. But that's a helpful flagging up. You had a further point.
Yeah. It's just a quick point. I think we also fail on P2 in terms of our own plan in terms of family loans. From what I've seen in the figures, we do fail on that slightly, but we do fail from that. So I think that's just a further thing that I think the committee should know as well.
Okay, thank you. I had a few questions as well. So, I mean, for me, I wanted to test this against, I think it's NSP 01 about the Aylesbury action area and the fact that that policy states that in that area we should be delivering 2,249 social rented homes as a total. I just wanted to ensure that we didn't think this application was in any way compromising that target.
No, this application would help meet that target because the number of social homes that would be delivered would be greater than that under the OPP.
Thank you. I had a question about the design review panel. So in I think it's paragraph 218, it talks about how this was considered by the design review panel in December 2021. But we obviously had a different application that was agreed by this committee, albeit it wasn't finally approved, but it was passed the committee, which took place in January 23. So I was slightly confused about the fact that this application was considered by the design review panel, presumably with its current elements, over a year before a different application was approved by committee. So just want to understand that and unravel that a little bit, just to understand all of that. Or has there been a subsequent visit to design review panel with this design? Because the wording suggests there might have been, but the dates don't appear to.
There hasn't been a subsequent review from the design review panel. Ultimately, what we're saying there is that the scheme that was presented to members in 2023, I think it was, but the 2022 original application was reviewed by the design review panel. This application obviously has a small amount of additional height on a few of the buildings, but as officers, we felt that that was not significant enough to require another design review.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And I just wanted to check, because you talked about the daylight and sunlight impacts, given that we did have that decision in January 23, to understand to what extent that application and this application differ in terms of daylight sunlight impacts. Have we any idea about that, or how material would those differences be?
I think there are some small greater impacts, but they're very, very minor.
Thank you. And actually, just a final point in terms of planning is just to understand the weight we ought to put on the application that was agreed January 23, given that it didn't get final approval. So the weight that we attach to those earlier decisions of committee when we're considering this application.
Yeah, I mean, so that is a very material consideration. Although the decision wasn't issued, the authority to issue it was agreed by committee relatively recently, 2 years ago. And of course, that's within the context as well of the Outline Planning Commission, which then set a wider, broader context, a scheme which has also been implemented, which approved the demolition and redevelopment of the estate.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Any further questions? Councillor Rose.
Yeah, I'm just going to add or ask a bit more about that context that Colin alluded to in terms of how long we've been waiting to realise and to build out and develop this as part of the wider master plan, and your view as officers on the ability to retain and strengthen in certain areas the offer in this application as compared to 2023, given the conditions, the housing delivery being changed even in that time period. And then finally, to understand the hierarchy of consideration about net gain and losses, my assessment or interpretation, and correct me if I'm wrong, is hierarchy would be the re-provision of housing that is there and habitable, the provision of housing to make up for housing that's there but uninhabitable or vacant, and then the hierarchy about housing that no longer exists and how long housing hasn't been able to be realised on Foxcote, for how long that's been not available to anybody in any form, if you know what I mean. So just to get my understanding of that from you, and then you did allude to if you proportion the contribution of the neighbouring developments in terms of the homes that the council have been purchased and people are now living in those homes. So I just wanted to understand that for clarity. Thank you.
Yes. So in terms of how challenging it is to deliver housing, it is much more challenging to deliver any housing in 2025 than it necessarily was in 2023. That may change over the next month in terms of funding available for affordable housing, but yet to be confirmed. The planning system is a permissive system, so it doesn't require things to be implemented, and we can't, and the planning committee can't require the implementation of a planning permission. But we have had the viability of the scheme checked, and our own independent viability assessments is that this is a viable scheme. I mean, questions about when that might happen probably best directed to the applicants, Notting Hill and their agents. In terms of the floor space, the housing which exists but is currently vacant. Our interpretation of that policy in our report is saying that that's what we should be counting as being replaced. We did anticipate, obviously, the Foxcote issue would come up. So as I said, and as Alex had checked, we did do a check against that to see how much floor space had been reprovided. The policy is about reprovision of floor space because it's looking for some flexibility about what kind of flats are reprovided. The Mayor's guidance on estate regen and also the London Plan policy acknowledges that because you don't always want to replace on a like-for-like basis size and type of unit. So that's the test we've taken rather than counting individual households moving between the things.
Forgive me for my lack of in-depth local knowledge. How long has Foxcote been demolished and not available?
I think it's been at least 5 years.
Thank you. Any further questions from members of the committee? No. In that case, we will move on to representations. So first of all, does anyone wish to speak in objection to the application? Okay, what I'd like to ask you to do, if you do wish to speak, if you could come forward to the table in front of you to speak. As I said before, I will give you 3 minutes to address the meeting, and then we'll take questions from committee members to you after that. Just so you are aware, as I said earlier, anything that you say into these microphones is a matter of public record, so please do not disclose any personal information you do not want to be known to the general public. So yeah, for example, if you don't want, it's useful to let us know roughly where you live, but probably don't give your full address, would be my advice. So I'll let you, yes. What? No, I'll allow you to introduce yourselves first and then give you 3 minutes. That's fine.
Oh, is that on? Yeah.
That's it. So yes, I should have said that before. So apologies. Yes, press the button and wait for the red light to come on before speaking.
Today we sent a slide presentation. We believe we were given permission to present a slide presentation, which is an illustration of the possibility of refurbishment.
Right. I mean, thank you for that. I first of all, we don't usually take presentations from objectors here at this committee. Officers did make me aware that you'd sent this, but sent something through. So I did ask what was on it. I understand, as you say, it was a presentation of an alternative proposal that you would like to be considered for.
It's an illustration that refurbishment might be possible.
Okay. Yeah. So what I would say to that is, it's one of the rules that we often say at this committee, that we have to consider the application that's in front of us. And a predecessor of mine said the application is the application is the application. What we're not able to do is to consider different alternatives to what that could be. If there is a different proposal to come forward, it would need to have a separate planning application in order for this committee to consider.
Do you have to provide evidence that there has been sufficient consideration to alternatives?
Well, what we are doing is we are looking at the application that's been put before us. Sorry to interrupt. In the process of doing the assessment, are the officers meant to consider the possible alternatives and assess possible alternatives? Isn't that part of their obligation? Well, it's a planning process. What we need to do is we need to consider the applications put in front of us on its merits, and obviously as part of that, we need to consider what consultation took place as part of that process. Now I understand perhaps that the broader point that you're making, that unfortunately this probably isn't the forum for that in terms of some of the broader discussion about what the right options are or were not in terms of how the Aylesbury has been redevelopment has come forward. What we need to look at is the specifics of the application we have in front of us, I'm afraid. Okay. So I hope that's helpful. I'm not going to take any of that out of your time. You'll be pleased to hear. I thought it was important clarification. So
we brought along the professional architect who did the drawings for us. So would he be able to answer any questions that you might have about the possibility? And
yes, obviously, if any members have questions on that, if that's something that's raised in your presentation, we're happy for committee members to ask questions. Okay. We will need to consider obviously how material that is to the application we've got in front of us, but I'm not going to rule it out altogether. So what I'm going to do,
we also have Holloway from Southwark Law Centre, who might be able to help clarify some of the legal issues.
That's fine.
He's available for questioning.
That's fine. Yes, if you need his help, then I'm happy for him to come forward and do that when you get to the questions. So that's fine.
It's for the committee to ask him questions.
Okay. Well, I think it would be for us to ask questions to you.
Yes.
And if you need anybody else to come forward to help answer those, then we're happy to facilitate that. Okay. Given all that, what I'm going to do is to ask you all to introduce yourselves, and then I'll give you 3 minutes to address.
So I'm Laura Fudge. I'm a resident on the Aylesbury. I've been living there for 40 years. I'm here to represent Aylesbury residents who've been campaigning for a long time for council housing against demolition. And I'm also here to represent the many people who are in temporary accommodation on the housing waiting list. There is a desperate need for housing. Yeah, that's me.
My name is Judy Boss. I used to live on Chartridge. I was a leaseholder there and went through 2 CPOs to try and fight for my home, but lost. I have a lot of information, much of which I'll be able to talk about. Foxcote. Foxcote wasn't included in 1B1C. And I'm here to be able to explain things more clearly and maybe get the correct information from the council.
I'm Luke Bowden. I'm from a non-profit organisation called Refurbish Don't Demolish, and we campaign for all the embodied carbon in any development to be taken into consideration. And one of the things that I think is extremely important is that we explain to councils who often don't understand what embodied carbon means, what the implications are of any development, and this development is a classic example of that.
Could you press the microphone? Thank you.
I'm Liba Haskin. I speak for the citizen jury, which was called after this chair of this committee put out motion to declare a climate emergency. And also I'm here as a neighborhood lives just across Aylesbury and who witnessed all the demolitions when the surrounding residents became sick and suffer with chronic lung problems.
Thank you. Those are quite lengthy introductions, and I've been slightly indulgent there, but I will allow you now 3 minutes, and I will be strict about the 3 minutes to present to the meeting.
There are material grounds on which to reject this planning application. It entails a net loss of social housing. It fails to factor in embodied carbon, and it fails to consider the refurbishment option. There is a climate, housing and planning emergency. Now is the time for the council to reappraise the asset that they have, truly affordable, light, spacious council homes, many with 2 or more bedrooms. Foxcote is an example. These, it's time to engage in serious thinking about alternatives to demolition. We thought we were going to present a slideshow. It was a refurbishment option for phase 2B that delivers the exact same number of homes as this application in accordance with national targets set to increase the supply of housing, and prepared by Hugh Dennis. The drive toward demolition and densification, now's the time to question this, to become more selective about what plans get approved.
I'd like to clarify the situation about Foxcote. The baseline was devised in 2008, and it went to the GLA and it was organised, and that's where the 2,249 accommodation that must be reprovided. That was the baseline, and it was devised in 2008. 1B1C was demolished, and when it was demolished, Foxcote had to be demolished so that the approved premises could be built in 2B. The GLA was not notified about the demolition of Foxcote for it. The figures were not included with the GLA. They were notified in December 2017, and those figures were not used. They must be used in 2B. The amount of social housing that's being including Foxcote is 322. that are being knocked down, and only 173 are being re-provided. I have asked for a schedule of accommodation for the accommodation. I've asked for the schedule of accommodation for what's in 2B at the moment, so we can know exactly the size of the properties, because what's been given today about the sizes in Padbury is not correct, and so we need to have a correct one. Like I've asked specifically, we must have that correct accommodation so that
30
it's
seconds.
like replacement and a schedule of accommodation here. The schedule of accommodation is number 48. Can you all look at number 48? This schedule of accommodation is in P1 of the new Southwark plan, and it must be provided, and it must show the sizes of the rooms, the amount of habitable rooms, how many masonettes are there. This is not a schedule of accommodation. They must provide a schedule of accommodation, because this is not adequate. Any questions that you have, how many 3-bedroom masonettes are there and what are the sizes, this schedule of accommodation should show you. It does not. They have not provided the schedule of accommodation, and it must be provided in order for it to go ahead.
That's your time up. So thank you very much for those presentations. I'm sure we'll have a number of questions from members of committee. Any questions for the objectors that anybody wants to ask this point? Councillor Edwards.
I know you've obviously run out of time on your 3 minutes, and you did say when you were introducing yourselves that you wanted to introduce some issues around embodied carbon, and so I would just like to ask you to kind of explain about that.
Well, the problem with this application is that the embodied carbon should include all the carbon that was produced when the building was created. That should be added to the embodied carbon that is produced when the building is demolished and when a new building is built. 11% of all CO2 emissions are emitted in the construction process globally. That's a part of 39% of all CO2 emissions are to do with the building industry. So the other 28% is heating costs and running costs. So the carbon figure that we've seen in the officer's report, it doesn't make any sense.
No.
Okay, and embodied carbon is not carbon that is released when a building is demolished. It's the carbon that is produced when steel and concrete is created, transported. And that, when we say it's locked in, it means that it's already been emitted into the atmosphere and it's already causing global warming. So knocking the building down means you've wasted all the carbon you've already emitted, and you're going to produce another whole new lot of carbon when you produce this new building. So this is in no way a carbon saving. You cannot argue this is a carbon saving. And that's what everybody needs to understand. And we need to take responsibility for future generations, because the greenest building is a building that already exists. That's the whole point.
Thank you. Councillor Tester.
Thank you for that explanation. That was really helpful. I've got a sort of related question around the embodied carbon. I know in our report from the officers, I think it's on paragraph 353 of our officer report. I don't know if you have that to hand. It says that the kind of whole life carbon assessment says that there has been some looking into whether the building could be repurposed, but the reports note there are kind of concerns about how much the concrete itself have degraded, and the kind of the robustness of the buildings themselves. And I know from residents from my ward who are in temporary accommodation in the Aylesbury that there are some structural issues that they sort of have found as kind of residents living there temporarily. So I don't know if you're able to sort of kind of elaborate on your points around that sort of refurbishment point, if it's something that has been, I think, considered by our officers here.
Yeah, these structural problems are covered by the retrofit model that we looked at, and I've had a quick look at the report. I haven't read the whole thing. There's no evidence in the report why the report is saying that the building is unviable. I think what's happened is that it has not been maintained. And retrofit and refurbishment is a much cheaper and more effective option than demolition. It's cheaper and it saves a huge amount of carbon. So to me, it's a maintenance issue, but we haven't seen the evidence. It's just been alluded to. It's not in the report, as far as I know, why the building has been deemed unviable. That's new since 2023. It's just appeared.
Well, add something to that. There are refurbishment, refurbishment options can strengthen the building, but there wasn't been a sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that'll be a question we'll want to follow up further with the applicants later on in the meeting. So thank you for
Can I
raising
also add one point? I was going to say that this breaches London Plan section H8C and the Southwark Plan on sustainability and net zero, and I think it's not compliant. So if you check those policies in terms of options considered, this plan does not meet those requirements. I can repeat that if you didn't hear it.
that. H8C.
H8C in the London Plan and the Southwark Plan in terms of sustainability and net zero, I don't think it's compliant.
Okay, thank you. We'll look into that further. So thank you for that. Sorry. Any further questions to the objectors that anybody would ask or raise? Councillor Edwards.
It's another one of those questions. Kind of, you introduced some issues when you were introducing yourselves, and I just wanted to dig into that a little bit more. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name on the end. Yeah, thank you. You mentioned an issue to do with health problems. Chronic. I think the phrase you used was chronic lung problems.
Yes.
What is that in relation to this application?
Oh, it's relation with the demolitions, with the whatever you do, the demolition, like the developer says that there is minimum effect on the neighbors. It is in the comment, minimum neighbor effect on the neighbors. It's a huge effect on the neighbors. It's on the health, on the noise. It's on the big disturbance, and it's on the breaking of the communities which are lost.
Leba has first-hand experience of living next to the demolition of Wolverton. She was on the next door estate. And yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful. Councillor Whittam.
Just to say, we haven't touched on the consultation. Can you outline consultations they put on?
What consultation has there been?
I don't understand.
What did we have? Are you saying did we have the opportunity to raise these points at the consultation events?
We did.
Yeah, I think so.
How many consultations?
Even nearly to all.
How far do you want to go back?
Yeah, exactly.
There was a ballot on the estate in 2002, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Where
2001.
2001, and 75% of the turnout voted against the current proposition then.
And what I would say about the building height, typically said not to have the building height. They were even lowered at one point. Then all of a sudden they've come back up again. Which, if you're going to have consultation, you should listen to it. It's not really fair. Then just disregard it.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask that question, given you raised it. Can you explain your concerns about building height? That's obviously a significant part of how this application differs to the previous one.
So in 2014, there were lots and lots of consultations going on before the OPP, and it was stated that we want to live in a family location with not so many high-rise buildings, and so lots of the buildings were then lowered to be what was in the OPP, and everybody was really quite happy about it. And then all of a sudden, they're a lot higher. There hasn't been consultation, and the people that have been moved out of 2B haven't been consulted on about any of the changes. Some people think they're going to be moving back to a house. There's no houses back there anymore, but that's what was consulted on. That's what people voted for. And yes, there's supposed to be houses here. People have been moved out of their homes, and the council has said you can come back to live in a house if that's going to be what's your requirement. There are not going to be any houses left, and nobody, not one single person from 2B has been asked. The people that have been moved off, the people that would want to come back to their own community, the council hasn't actually even contacted them.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further indications from committee members to...
There are a number of really broken policies, and this could be explained by chat from So the close and which actually broken policies, and maybe we should inquire about that.
Yes, we'll allow that. Jed, do you want to come forward? I'm not going to give you a very long time to speak because we obviously heard from the objectors already. So I don't want a full speech because it's not fair to everybody. But if you could just, you're familiar with committee, so if you would like to sort of briefly cover those points.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I'll keep it brief. A lot of it has already been mentioned. Just to kind of quickly go through the two aspects of H8. So H8C says before considering the demolition and replacement of affordable homes, boroughs and their partners should always consider alternative options first. So whereas normally it's correct that alternative considerations for the site shouldn't be considered, that policy creates a different consideration there when it comes to considering whether we should demolish or refurb. It says they should balance the potential benefits of demolition and rebuilding of homes against the wider social and environmental impacts and consider the availability of mayoral funding and any conditions attached to that funding. I don't know if that's been adequately considered. Reggie and Colin have already had that discussion around policy H8D. The key wording for me is demolition of affordable housing, including where it is part of an estate redevelopment programme, should not be permitted unless it is replaced by an equivalent amount of affordable housing floor space. This is demolition as part of an estate redevelopment programme. It doesn't say this application, it says this redevelopment programme. I don't think anyone would say that the demolition of Foxcote was not part of this estate redevelopment programme. So Colin mentioned supporting paragraph 485, which isn't itself a policy, it's supporting wording. I don't see that as contradicting that view. It just clarifies that existing affordable housing floor space includes unoccupied. But that policy that I just read out doesn't mention existing floor space. So I don't see it as responding to or contradicting what I've just said. We've already touched on policy P2, family housing. I just want to note, so there's 3 breaches there. I can quickly confirm what they are. But I think what's important to note is that those policies were specifically designed in reference to the Aylesbury estate, and they're worded in language of must. Development must deliver X% of 2 beds, X% of 3 beds, X% of 5 beds. All of them are breached. They were designed through a consultation process, effectively a promise to the residents of the Aylesbury estate, specifically to that estate. I think it's particularly unacceptable to breach a policy that's so specifically relating to this site. The justification given is that prioritization of social rent has been given to the larger units. For me, that doesn't make sense as a justification because prioritization of the social rent to larger units doesn't result in more social rent. And in terms of the commerciality for the developer, the reason it doesn't result in more social rent is because social rent is calculated on sometimes floor space, sometimes habitable room. So if it's the larger units, there's fewer units. They just got more habitable rooms in those units. It also makes sense for the developer to do that because they make more money on smaller units, on the private units when they're smaller units. So it suits them commercially to do that prioritization of family units as social rent. So I don't see that as a compromised position. I see that as a breach that hasn't been justified. And then finally, the site allocation places a limit of 15 to 20 stories on this particular aspect of the site. Speaking personally, I'm not against tall buildings and I don't want to be seen to be, but I think if that breach of the site allocation is going to happen, I think there needs to be clear public benefits given to counterbalance that harm. I don't see any public benefits here going above and beyond the existing policy requirements to justify that harm. So when you look at the breach of policy in relation to retrofit, the breach of policy in relation to net loss of social rent, breach of policy in relation to family housing, and the breach of height, I think you're looking at a large pile of harms and a lack of corresponding benefits.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of questions on that. So earlier on, after officers' presentations, one of the questions I asked was whether the development of this site was compromising the overall objective in the area action plan, 2,249 homes. I was given a very clear answer, no, precisely the opposite. So I guess your point in terms of the site and loss of social housing depends on where you're drawing your perimeter. If you're looking at the totality of the area action plan, and this as being an element of what's delivering the area action plan, then it appears to me it's compliant. It's only if you're looking specifically at the boundary of the site here that we have that issue where we need to consider, do we consider Foxcote or not? So that's my observation on it, and I welcome your take on that as an observation.
Sure. So first of all, I think as has already been mentioned, this application is a standalone application. So the starting point is to consider it on its own terms and consider it against policy in its own terms. The policy language is about demolition and replacement. So we need to look at that in its own terms again. I would account, demolition of Foxcote is within 2B. It wasn't counted previously. So that's how I'd interpret that. A comparison against the OPP is a material consideration, but it's not the starting point in policy terms. That policy doesn't speak about, that's just a sort of hypothetical comparator. It's not the fundamental question for that policy H8. And I would say, that 2,249 number is another consideration. And if we can use policy H8 to increase the amount of social floor space here, then we'll get even closer to that number.
Okay. Just add something about, that there have been hundreds of homes that have been demolished, and the council is playing catch up at replacing all of the homes in phase one that have been demolished. And I don't think it hasn't caught up. Even so talking about the first development site as that's for the phases that have been in phase one. That's just an observation I would like to make, because it seems fully thinking going on about the first development site.
No, that's helpful. Thank you for coming forward to talk to us. I think it's really constructive to give us some questions to ask further on to both the applicants and as we make our decision. So I want to thank you again for coming to talk to committee. If you could return to the public seating area, but thank you for coming on. And yes, if you could turn the microphone off on your way. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the applicants or the applicants' agents to come to address the meeting. So, again, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves, and then once you've done that, I will give you 3 minutes to address the committee, and then we'll take questions from.
Hi, Jake Brodetsky, Development Partner. Applicants.
Yes, sorry, that's a good point. Yes, please do lean into the microphone so they are a little hard to hear. So,
Jake Brodetsky, Development Partnerships Director at Notting Hill Genesis.
Jack Roche from McQueen Laverton. When we are one of the architects that work on site and need some outside coordination, so I can represent architects.
Patrick Grinsell, HGH Consulting. We're planning advisors to Notting Hill Genesis for the project.
And I'm Dan Jessen, Director of East, and we're working on the realm and the landscape master plan.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair and members. Notting Hill Genesis is the council's development partner for the regeneration of the Aylesbury estate. Through the partnership with the council, we've already delivered over 1,000 homes, of which 69% are for affordable housing. Phase 2B will deliver 50% affordable housing, of which 65% will be large family-sized homes, and approving this application will allow us to continue the important regeneration work as soon as possible to bring forward 640 much-needed high-quality new homes that are the subject of this planning application. Members will recall that this application previously secured a unanimous resolution to grant planning in January 23. to ensure that we deliver high quality and safe homes for future residents. And following significant changes to fire safety legislation, a review of the scheme has led to several internal design improvements, including the provision of second stair cores to all buildings over 18 metres in height. These changes have resulted in a reduction of the amount of available floor space for housing. And so to address this, some minor increases in height of no more than 1 storey have been proposed to some of the lower rise blocks, but there's no increase in height proposed to the proposals that you saw in 2023 to the tower element of the block, which remains the same. The key principles of the scheme, including the principle of redeveloping the site, have already been established by the previous committee resolution and haven't changed. Overall, the design changes will deliver 26 additional homes, the majority of which are for affordable housing, so 10 for social rent and 7 for shared ownership. The proposals follow closely the principles established for Phase 2B in the Outline Planning Permission, but have responded to updated policy and regulatory requirements. We're committed to delivering a high quality development and importantly to providing more homes and more affordable homes than envisaged through the Outline Planning Permission. NHG's worked closely with officers to develop and refine the scheme through numerous pre-application meetings, design review panels and high levels of engagement have been had with local residents, which has significantly shaped our proposals. To just reiterate, the key elements of the proposal is the delivery of 640 new homes with an increase of both social rent and shared ownership provision, delivery of 50% affordable homes, over 65% of which are family-sized homes and 10% are wheelchair accessible, and the creation of 2 new high-quality public spaces, Thurlow Square and Bagshot Park, overall an 18% increase in public open space. I'm supported here by members of the project team who have already introduced themselves. We're all happy to answer questions, and I'd encourage members to support the officer's carefully considered recommendation and approve this application to enable us to continue at pace with our successful track record of regeneration at the Aylesbury estate. Thank you.
That is precisely 3 minutes, so well done getting it in quite that time. Sorry, I can see somebody at the edge of the meeting who's taking photographs. Can I just remind you that if you are taking photographs, just to take photographs in this direction in the meeting. Thank you. Questions to the applicants? Councillor Rose.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off wanting to know and understand your presence in this part of Southwark, and you referred to being the development partner alongside the council, and you made reference to the current quantum of housing that you are provided and delivering and the percentage of affordable. And I wanted to understand the context by which you'd shaped this final application, because we've had reference from objectors to previous policy documents and intentions around the provision of housing and replacement of what was there prior. And I wanted to understand the way in which you've shaped this application to respond to your knowledge and understanding of local demand and need, and how you've shaped and how that's informed the size of the units and the floor space, and how you want to meet that need both across all tenures, if you like. And then we've also had reference to the importance around carbon and the energy efficiency and rating of it, and some very important principles were talked about by the objectors. But I want to know and understand the long-term energy efficiency of new homes as opposed to retrofitting, and from a resident's perspective, being able to secure a new modern built home that was far more energy efficient in the long run will have benefits to the overall cost and affordability of that home to them in the long term. But I do take on board the points were made around construction. And then on wrapping that up, whether you had any views, because you are a significant presence in London, the extent to which your knowledge of retrofit as an option and why you don't explore it, and what you do to provide the conclusions you've drawn in line with your partners, which might be local authorities, around the benefits and the arguments for new build in that context. Thank you. There's a lot there, but I'll leave it there.
There's quite a bit there to unpack. I'm sure Councillor Rose will be happy to repeat bits.
I'll do my best to pick up on all of the points, and if I fail to, please, pick me up and I'll come back to it. So I suppose in terms of Notting Hill Genesis's presence at the at the Aylesbury estate and the work to date. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, we've got 1,060 homes already either delivered or in the course of construction on the Aylesbury estate, of which 69% are affordable housing. Delivery of high levels of affordable housing is Notting Hill Genesis's core purpose. We deliver a mixed tenure approach, partly to deliver balanced communities, but also to ensure the financial viability of the projects that we deliver. But our core purpose is to deliver affordable housing. And so we've been pleased to have worked with the council successfully on both FDS A and FDS B, where we have been able to agree the sale of those homes, which we have begun construction of, to the council for them to be able to be used as 100% social rented sites. And we've done that in a way which has effectively sold those at cost back to the council. So we haven't made profit through that. And we've wanted to do that because we think it's a good thing for the estate. So that's our approach, and that's how we've come at all of these sites. We're also extremely minded to the housing crisis which exists in London and the importance of the delivery of as much high quality affordable housing and housing generally as possible, which kind of probably intersects with some of the points around retrofit and refurbishment. So where it comes to phase 2B, we obviously brought a scheme previously which was slightly lower density to the one which is before you now. And the approach there was really looking at the site both through the lens of what the parameters were that had been established through the outline planning permission, but then also looking at what had changed, which was quite a lot since the date that the outline planning permission had been granted, which was I think back in 2015, if my memory serves, and ensuring that the scheme was, I suppose, fit for its current requirements and fitted with its current policy. There's been substantial consultation undertaken throughout the time that we've been in partnership with the council at the Aylesbury. So we entered the partnership agreement with the council back in 2014, and since then we have had substantial presence on the estate. We've undertaken, I probably couldn't tell you how much community engagement, but we've got some stats which will the team around the table can pick up on if you want to know the specifics in a moment. But we've undertaken substantial consultation on this proposal specifically, both in the run-up to the application that this committee saw in 2023, where there was, I suppose, a higher response rate to that to that consultation, because I guess in essence there was more being consulted upon. But in the revisions to the application that we made during 2024, we did further consultation to ensure that the, in our view, minor changes which we were proposing were also, I suppose, informed by the community view. And in our view, the response to that consultation was strongly supportive of both the design and the priority that we've given both to the amount of affordable housing which is being provided, but also the amount of public open space and the type of public open space. So a lot of the feedback that we got was specifically around some of the points that have previously been raised around play space and ensuring that there was suitable facilities for children of all different ages on the site, not necessarily requiring older children to use some of the amenities in the neighbouring Burgess Park. And we made a number of changes. The mugger has been discussed, I think, already. So that was one of the points which we adjusted in direct response to that consultation. Turning to the question around retrofit and refurbishment, I don't think I'd characterise our approach as rejecting that as a principle. That's not our approach. But in this instance, the buildings are in very, very poor condition. There are fundamental issues which have been deteriorating over time with the buildings, which there has been survey information, I think, dating back to 2005 and has been regularly updated since, which demonstrates that. There has also been a significant worsening of the, I guess, levels of safety around the buildings, which in my opinion, is a direct result of some of the fundamental layout and design of those buildings. So that layered with our view, which I would disagree with the comment earlier, that it would be possible to re-provide the number of homes which this application proposes if you were retrofitting. I don't think that would be possible. And the point that you made, I think, at the end of your question around the cost in use and the experience of a resident living in one of those new homes is a dramatically cheaper and a dramatically different experience living in a modern flat which has been built with high levels of insulation and which benefits from environmentally friendly heating sources. So there'll be electrically powered air source heat pumps with PV cells on the roofs, thermally efficient buildings, and all sorts of other measures which will be part of what we deliver through building regulations. What we build will be a nicer place to live and a cheaper place to live and a less resource intensive place for residents to live. Is there anything that I've not picked up which you asked?
That was really helpful, thank you. I might have some comments about landscaping access to and from the park and the access, and I see the benefits of in communities play provision, but also opening up safe routes to Burgess Park as well, and investment in the park itself for the benefit of the new residents. But I'll leave it there for now.
Councillor Edwards, I think that's all.
You Max, two questions. You made reference to thinking about alternatives to this scheme. You made reference to the safety of residents in a refurbished and retrofitted scheme in answer to the previous question. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? That's my first question. Second question, you sort of danced around this and a little bit at the end of your last answer, but I wanted to kind of hone down on it. Do you think that this application is a greener option than retrofitting and refurbishing? Let's safety of residents. You made reference to that in your first question.
Okay, so I guess unless you want me to, I won't sort of give a detailed account of some of the safety issues that are currently exhibiting themselves on the estate, but there are, there has been a sort of, I suppose, a long recorded and well recorded set of issues which the council is dealing with, and we're seeking to support the council where we can in doing that at the moment. The design of the buildings, and our architects can maybe comment on this a little
Sorry,
more.
can I just come back? Could you, I understand, don't want to be too explicit about perhaps some of these things, but if you could just spell that out a little bit more. That was slightly vague in terms of what you meant by that. Those sort of social behaviour.
Okay, so within some of the blocks which are subject of this proposal, which we're proposing are demolished and replaced, there are currently significant issues to do with drug dealing, with violence. There's been, I believe, a murder within a neighbouring block of a similar design recently. There have been a series of fires of varying different severities within the buildings which are subject of this application, to the extent that a number of the blocks which are now empty have had to be hoarded with quite significant security measures put in place to prevent that situation from worsening. So that's the kind of the extent current issues. In terms of what's being designed, the buildings are very, very different in their nature to those which they're replacing. So the buildings are designed with secured by design accreditation being built in from the very beginning of the design process. Notting Hill Genesis then has a set of employers' requirements, which is our specification for what the buildings need to be delivered against, and that in a very significant degree with the communal spaces is focused on ensuring that the layout and the design of the buildings firstly is to discourage and to minimise crime, so overlooking doors that you can see through, removing areas that are potential spots that people could loiter, then fitting equipment which is secure and high specification to prevent unauthorised access into parts of the estate which are private. So that is, I guess, the enhancements that I'm talking about. In terms of whether retrofit would be a greener option, I mean, I can't say about the proposals which were just mentioned because I've not seen those proposals. But I guess our view, and Patrick maybe will come in just a moment, our planning consultant, but our view is that I guess it's a combination of all sorts of considerations. So I think it's certainly the case that the homes that we build will be substantially cheaper and less energy heavy than the homes which are currently there, which will have all sorts of quality of life benefits as well as reducing the environmental impact of the project. And I guess that combined with the point that I made earlier around the quantum of housing and the I think the importance of us using the scarce resource of land that there is in this part of London efficiently to deliver as many homes as possible combines to saying that the retrofit option simply doesn't provide the cumulative benefits that this proposal does.
Thank you, Jude. Just to add to a couple of points there. In terms of the embodied carbon and that point, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but we did produce a whole life carbon assessment, the application. That was submitted, officers assessed it, and importantly the GLA officers assessed that and support the submission of that document. So they support our application in all respects in that regard. Just the other point about the layout and form, we talked about the buildings themselves being in a very poor condition, and that goes back to surveys from 2005, and it doesn't just stop at the buildings, it also looks at their configuration, the layout, how you move around this part of the estate and other areas as well. That configuration doesn't allow sort of active and safe permeable residents, pedestrians in particular. They're poorly connected. The open spaces that are there, they might look green, but they're very poorly connected. They're not really accessible. They're not safe. The ability we have through this scheme and the regenerations we're looking at now is to comprehensively address what is a very, very important site, an important piece of urban real estate, is a better phrase, to provide significant numbers of homes, 640 new homes, 50% of them will be, to meet housing needs. And I think the retrofit option discussed wouldn't deliver the larger homes that you're talking about, and if it did, it would significantly reduce the number of homes that would be provided. And it allows us to provide very, very fundamental improvements to open space provision, and open space quality and functionality. And that's something in the consultation we have done with the community, and I'd like to get Dan to talk some more about that, because that actual engagement went out to local schools, asked them about what they wanted in those spaces, and that has shaped proposals. And that's really very important. And yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay. I can say a little bit, because you also talked about it just before, about safe and accessible open spaces. And I think the way the layout was just described as being functional in its current arrangement, that is completely addressed here, with streets, with buildings opening up to those streets, communal courtyards that are overlooked, that are accessible locally by the people who live just around those. And in addition to that, we then have a square and a park, which are accommodating both play but also amenity spaces for others. And actually, that's a big thing that has come out of the consultation and engagement process in terms of the way maybe different communities from different cultures in the area are using these amenity spaces in different ways. And that's been accommodated. And the play provision has been designed to actually work with, I suppose, requirements as we understand them now, in terms of kids of all abilities with different needs, genders, and so on. And that is not accommodated at all within the public realm and the public spaces as we see them currently. The other thing is that Thurrow Street and Backshot Street were being massively. And so actually the safety of people moving around will be completely transformed because they're on streets, overlooked and so on, but also far more active because actually Backshot Street will become this green community spine, which is planning policy.
Thank you. Councillor Tester.
Thank you very much. This might be a sort of question for you as well in terms of that kind of community engagement. I think we heard from the objectors that some of the residents, the past residents of this Phase 2B area haven't been consulted. I was wondering if you would be able to sort of talk to that point from the objectors.
I'll have to let officers sort of respond on whether who they've reached out and communicated to for past residents. But from our consultation exercise, it was very widely publicised out to aspects of the community we believe needed to be reached out to as part of this application. Clearly, we don't have addresses of people away from Aylesbury. We can't follow them, we can't track them. But for those that we're aware of, we were able to reach out to them both through direct communication, newsletters, but also holding active events, consultation events, where residents were invited to come and talk to members of the team, to review the proposals, to interact with us, to have these conversations throughout the process. So we feel it has been a very active consultation process that has gone on over time, and we are comfortable and confident have been as thorough as we need to be with that.
Thank you. Councillor Papula. Oh, right, okay, that's very kind of you. I was going to ask, so we heard from the objectors about their concerns about the bedroom mix. So clearly this scheme is compliant where it comes to social housing in terms of those larger units, but not in terms of private housing. And we heard from the objectors that they felt that was a way that you were seeking to maximise your return from all of this, and it was playing fair with the planning policy. So just really to hear your views on that, as obviously that's something you need to consider as part of this application.
Okay, if I start off and then Patrick maybe will pick up from me. So, I mean, as I said earlier, we prioritise the delivery of affordable housing as our approach to the scheme. There is a substantial cost in delivering large homes. You know, it's expensive to build in London. It's getting more expensive, and everything that's happened since the last committee and now has only made that even more the case with the additional measures that we've built into the schemes in terms of the additional fire safety measures. So I guess it's not the case that it's more affordable for us to deliver large social rented homes compared to larger sale homes. And the grant which we receive from GLA to support the project is a flat rate per home. It's not weighted according to the size of the home which we deliver. I guess there is a fundamental, market-driven issue which is well, I think, understood and discussed at the moment around the affordability of large homes to people to buy on the open market. You know, this is a relatively expensive part of London, and those homes would command a high value, and the level of demand for that, I think, would not be that great, and it is not in our interests, and I don't think it would be in either Southwark or the community's interests either, for us to promote a project which had homes in it which we may then struggle to sell, because it will create a viability difficulty on the delivery of the project. I think one of the comments earlier that was picked up in the minutes of the previous meeting was a concern about the pace of delivery, and Notting Hill wants to get on and deliver this. We've got a track record of delivery on the Aylesbury already, and we want to continue that with this project. A lack of viability as we go through that isn't going to support or assist with that. So, it's a balance of those considerations, which is why we've prioritised the mix as it is. But we do know that there is a really, really high demand for social rented homes that are large, because there are families on the waiting list who will be on the waiting list for a long, long time. Families who are, to a layman's view, overcrowded, who might not be statutorily overcrowded, who are living in a 1 or a 2 bedroom flat with a large number of children, who will possibly be waiting for 5-6 years to get up. It's really important to prioritise that delivery, which is the approach we've taken.
Thank you. And just to come back on that slightly, so that was a helpful answer. Just to summarise as a question, are you advising us that if to get the overall policy compliance in terms of bedroom size across the scheme, by having 4 and 5 bedroom private homes, that would undermine the viability of the application? Is that what you're saying? Because it sounds as if that might be what you're saying, but I want to be clear on that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just also add to that? It's in forming the scheme and coming up with the mix for the scheme, both in the affordable and in the private. The affordable very much looking at housing needs, but also in the market looking at housing needs as well. And advice was taken internally, it's not just with the architects, but also from specialists in the area about what the market requirements were. And yes, it would impact viability if you produced homes you couldn't sell, but it's also the issue, you don't want voids. You don't want to develop a scheme like this, which I think would be a fantastic scheme and a fantastic asset for the area. You don't want lots of vacant properties that simply can't market. So that it just wouldn't make sense to do that. So by targeting the housing need in the way we have, we're confident this scheme is deliverable and will be occupied at a good rate.
Thank you. Further questions from members of the committee? Councillor Pooler, did you? No? Okay. I think we have completed questions from committee. So thank you very much for coming forward and giving us some very comprehensive answers. Please do return to the public seating area. I think I understand what Councillor Whittam was about to ask. I think we're now going to take a 5-minute adjournment break. I believe that's what you're requesting, is it, Councillor Whittam? We'll take a 5-minute adjournment comfort break, but please do come back in 5 minutes. Thank you. we will restart. If people could settle down, please. So next part of the agenda is to ask, do we have any supporters of the application that live within 100 metres of the scheme that would like to address the committee? I am not seeing anybody raising their hand. That brings us to ward councillor, and I can see a ward councillor present. Welcome to Planning Committee A. If you would like to introduce yourself, and then I'll give you 3 minutes to address the meeting.
Hello, I'm Councillor Katsia Harper. I'm the Friday Ward Councillor. I'm not joined by Sam Foster, although he'd very much like to be here. This application was pushed back a number of times, and he did prioritise that, but unfortunately for him to have been here today, he would have had to change a flight, which he was willing to do, but I said I could do it on my own. But my presentation, I have worked on very closely with Sam, so it is both of us speaking, and Mohammed, our third ward councillor, although he's been less involved in this shenanigan, he is also happy with the kind of substantive points of what we're going to be saying.
Okay, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to address.
Thank you so much. So the committee last considered an application for this site to be over 2 years ago, and we are here again. It is depressingly ironic that at that time, Sam and I made clear our concerns about the lack of progress on the regeneration, the lack of clarity for residents, and the ongoing degradation of the conditions on the estate and the harm this was causing. These problems have all worsened. In my remarks today, I'm going to focus on this context, and it's critical that the committee understands what the application means concretely for the estate. Is the master plan still credible, and what can we realistically expect going forward? Members will know that this is one part of the second of 4 phases of an overall master plan, supposedly. I say supposedly as following the judicial review last year, and given the standalone nature of this application, it is fair to say the master plan and the DPA are no longer a credible promise of what will actually happen to the Aylesbury estate, and have in effect been abandoned. Rather than offer a clear position on this, Southwark Council and Notting Hill Genesis prefer to maintain a state of limbo. The master plan appears to be both dead and alive, depending on who you ask and at what time of day you ask them. After Southwark's plan to take over the delivery of the future phases fell through in 2022, there should have been another plan put in place, made with residents to give them confidence and set the regeneration back on a credible path. Instead, Southwark and Notting Hill Genesis have chosen to muddle through and maximise uncertainty about the future. In doing so, they have caused direct and ongoing harm to the residents. Why does this matter for Phase 2B? Because it undermines confidence in Notting Hill Genesis' capacity to deliver not only future phases of the regeneration, but this one as well. The history of delivery on the estate is not reassuring. The largest portion of the estate built out by Notting Hill Genesis so far was enabled by the council's mass direct purchases on homes, first development site, agreeing an extra 280 in 2020 because of stalling on construction. Additionally to that, the construction of Plot 18 has suffered many delays and has still not been fully handed over. Of the application itself, the most significant issue is the loss of social housing units. Notwithstanding our concerns about how these figures were calculated, as the officer's report notes, the application represents a loss of 154 social rent homes from the current development and 17 fewer social rent habitable routes. It is vitally important to maintain our numbers of council homes given the endless housing crisis. Positively, we welcome the improvements to public space, children's play space and the greening of Bagshot Street. Finally, I would ask the committee to consider the following. When this regeneration is finally over, in whatever form that is, we will be left with the question, was it worth it? The longer the disruption and degradation continues, the more years of stalled progress and changing plans, not to mention the real risk that a replication of the situation that has happened in Wendover occurs, the higher the bar will be to answer yes. The question for committee today is an even harder question to answer, which is, can Notting Hill Genesis deliver what they have promised? As ward councillors, we are not confident they are. If you want to ask me further questions, maybe you would want to ask me about the harm caused by delays, our lack of confidence that 2B will be delivered, our concerns about granting permission outside of the OPP, and our concerns regarding the relationship between Southwark and Notting Hill Genesis. Thank you. I think I went over time.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you for that very helpful contribution, particularly the context and the history you've given us today. I did listen very, very carefully to what you were saying. I didn't pick up whether or not you as a ward councillor are in favour or against this application. Are you in favour or against this application?
That is actually a question I don't feel prepared to answer today or able to answer today. And I know that's frustrating. I would say my view is the best case scenario for the regeneration is the dissolving of the relationship between Notting Hill Genesis and Southwark Council. And so with that in mind, if this site with application was granted today, and but what came with that was a kind of commitment to the fact that this was going to be the last bit done by Notting Hill Genesis, I would definitely be in favour of this application. That is because the conditions on Wendover are so bad right now. Wendover is a lost cause at this point, and that is not, in my opinion, due to the nature of the building. That is due to the delays which have happened and the disrepair which the building has been allowed to fall into. So that's kind of why my answer. It's difficult for me to answer the question because I would like to see that relationship dissolved. If by not granting permission to this application, that meant that there was going to be serious conversations with good leadership from Southwark about what the future of the estate regeneration was going to be, I would welcome that. So do you see what I'm saying? And I just want to clarify that is my position rather than mine and the ward positions. I think they broadly agree, but I don't want to put words in their mouth.
That's helpful. Councillor, just want to come back on that, and then
just a quick follow. Again, helpful context for us, and I do understand the position you're setting out. You did say at the start of your answer, though, that that's not a position that you feel that you're in a position to give us an answer to tonight. Unfortunately, that's not the situation for the councillors sat around here. So let me put the question another way. If you were sat in our position, what decision would you make this evening?
I'm going to be really difficult. And unfortunately, I wouldn't, because I'm a resident on the estate, so I'd have to recuse myself.
I think we're digging into grounds of speculation here, Councillor.
It's an inherently hypothetical question, I guess.
It is, but I'm not on the committee tonight, and I'm not being asked to look at all the evidence being presented to me. I am giving evidence.
The fair answer. Councillor Pooler.
Yeah. Could you please provide more information as to why there is, I guess, a lack of trust with the applicant to carry out the scheme? It was approved, and also you mentioned the outline plan and permission being abandoned. Could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's kind of a couple of things in that. So I'll just start by kind of talking about what we perceive like knock-on effect of granting permission outside of the OPP is. We've been told that this application needs to be considered the application. However, we have also been told that it is unclear if granting planning will have an effect on future phases of the estate. Given the outcome of the judicial review that ruled that section 96A, the amendment to the OPP, which happened in 2023, I believe, considering that that amendment was found that it could not be considered non-material, it seems unlikely that if the application were approved, there would not be a challenge to the implementation decision, and following that could well be upheld. And with that in mind, the submission of a standard application we think could impact the validity of the OPP moving forward, which could then render the DPA void. So regardless, if this application is granted, I think it is very fair to say it is likely there will be legal challenges and there will be another period of uncertainty, and that uncertainty will be ongoing. And that actually, in my opinion and Sam's opinion, that uncertainty gives Notting Hill Genesis more power and more flexibility about what future phases of the regeneration will look like, and it reduces Southwark's power because Southwark is in a position now where our hands are tied. We need this to happen very urgently in the case of Site 2B. That was my concerns around the OPP. I guess in terms of my confidence that Notting Hill Genesis will be able to deliver the scheme, I'm going to go back to the point I mentioned, which is that FDS A and B, Southwark Council brought back 280 extra properties, and that was a decision which was made in part because of concerns about how slowly construction was taking place. I think it is highly disingenuous for the applicant to refer to their delivery so far with that information in mind. I don't know if FDS would have been completed if that decision hadn't been made by Southwark Council to intervene in that way. On top of that, the reason that 2B is being submitted again as a standalone application is because the OPP and what we saw in 2023 is no longer viable due to unforeseen changes due to housing regulations, including fire safety and space standards that's been spoken about. Do we then have confidence that there is enough tolerance in this scheme that if there are further changes outside the applicant's control, that won't mean we're here again in 2 years, given the fact there's likely going to be a legal challenge, which then pushes it back? I don't know. I think given the fact that the fact that the applicants were talking about how increasing the number of 5-bed homes could make the scheme unviable, I think this is a real risk and something I'd be very concerned about.
Councillor Tester.
Thank you so much for that. I think it's really helpful to kind of get your sort of perspective. I think building on the point that you have just made and kind of put kind of contrary scenario to you, if we were minded to refuse, and that's not me giving a kind of judgment of where I'm at currently, there is obviously the option that the applicant might appeal as well. And do you think that there are robust enough reasons that would stand up in an appeal if we sort of decided to go down that route? Because I think that's a similar sort of circumstance could eventually kind of happen if we approved or refused it, and you could have this sort of limbo and this uncertainty. So I don't know if you thought there are robust reasons for refusal in this instance.
I think given there are some parts of policy which aren't being met, there are reasons to refuse on those grounds. I think it's not only the 5-bed rooms. I think the policy, this scheme is not hitting the 2 beds and 3 beds. Also, there is obviously the question about Fox Code. But I think more broadly, it is a matter of public knowledge that there was a freedom of information request which was submitted by a campaign group which revealed that there were talks between Southwark Council and Notting Hill Genesis to end the DPA. So that is something that until recently, Notting Hill Genesis and Southwark Council were in conversation to do. So I obviously don't know. I'm not a planning person and I have not been in the room of those conversations. But to me, there seems there's a lack of kind of willingness really to go forward with the regeneration anyway. So again, I'm not a planning. I think I said this in the last time I was here. I said I'm not a planning guru. So I can't make a judgment call on whether or not there's grounds for there to be a successful appeal. I guess what I'm saying is from where I'm sitting, it seems there's not really appetite from Notting Hill Genesis to continue with the regeneration as laid out in the DPA.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of, I think, follow on from Councillor Tester's question to some extent, which is really to say that we obviously agreed an application on this site in January 2023. So to understand that you've obviously expressed your concern about the speed of the process and where the relationship between the council and AB. But are there, in terms of the application itself, are there concerns that you have with the application in terms of those changes since January 23 that you think that we need to consider?
I think this, and I'm grateful that this was noted in the addendum, concerns we had about meaningful consultation with residents. And I think, as Jed said earlier, I'm not necessarily opposed to tall buildings, but one of the key concerns in previous consultations was about the height of one of the buildings. And I believe the height of this building is taller than the previous one, which that's less a concern about the application, but more a concern about consultation and meaningful consultation. I think my biggest concerns are regarding social rent. I said this, I think I alluded to the fact that we are not clear on how the calculations have been made. Myself and Sam and Mohammed have had multiple meetings with officers from both Southwark and Notting Hill Genesis. And each time we've had those meetings, as we've gotten closer to committee, the kind of calculations for floor space have become a little bit more favourable each time, because the communal space was measured differently, or we didn't include this property because it was actually, it turned out that was one which was a leasehold, so we didn't need to include that in the spaces anymore. I don't know like what the accurate kind of measures are, because it feels like this information has been made confusing and kind of unclear to me. So I guess I can't concretely say whether or not the space is better or worse in terms of social rent units and hab rooms, but I would say it's a concern to me that it hasn't been clear in those conversations how those calculations have been made. And so as always, social rent and the amount of social rent is a concern when we're talking about massive regenerations of council housing estates.
Thank you. Any further questions from members of the committee?
There is something else I'd like to say, if anybody would like to ask me to.
I saw a number of hands go up, so I think we'll give you the latitude to do that.
It's about the kind of harm which is being caused by the delays. Last time I was here, we talked about kind of harms like just the kind of well-being of residents not knowing what was going on. The harm I want to talk about today is much more acute, and this is regarding the kind of blocks which have largely been empty. I'm going to refer to Wendover. I actually think it's quite outrageous that this was referred to by the applicant as kind of a problem with the estate, rather than as a problem with the delays to the regeneration. And that's because basically Wendover is a large block, and a number of years ago it was mainly emptied, and so there was only a number of temporary accommodation residents there and a couple of leaseholders. Since then, the building has been neglected and very largely misused, putting residents and community members at risk of harm. There have been fires, a lot of fires. There has been a death, as I understand it's an unexplained death still. And I've been to visit these blocks. I've been visiting these blocks for 10 years. Before I was the councillor, I was just a campaigner and knocked on those doors. The level of kind of degradation has been like really shocking to see. There's been occasions where I've gone and there have been like open what I've known as those crackdowns where there have been needles on the floor, human feces, cups of urine, which have been accessible to anyone who could just enter the building. That's not just kind of community members, but also there are temporary accommodation families in these buildings. And I think this is a problem which has happened because there have been delays, and that's not all on Nottingham Genesis, that is also on council. But so the kind of continuing delays have just made that problem worse. This building has recently, I think it was finished last week, a massive operation has been taken by the council and other services to clear these buildings in a safe way, and they've now been like entirely locked up. As I understand, there was a decision paper made by Cabinet a few months ago, which has allocated funds, if necessary, to take over the cost of demolition of that building, which did actually raise the question for me earlier when talking about whether or not Foxcote should be included, because that was demolished a few years ago. If Southwark Council demolishes Wendover because of this acute issue, like what happens if this planning application comes back in 2 more years and then they don't have to consider the kind of number of social houses on that site? Anyway, that's a slightly different thing. But what I would say, if the pattern of delay and decline persists, as I feel is likely, it is untenable to expect Southwark to be able to fulfil its duty of care to residents and community members. Yeah, and then just to add, the areas of the estate which haven't been decanted are not unsafe compared to other areas of London. There are amenities which are well used. There are courtyards which are overlooked by houses. People, they are safe places for kids to be. I think it's highly disingenuous for the acute issues on Wendover, which are a direct result of the delay in this regeneration to be used reason to demolish the estate as a whole.
Thank you. That's powerful testimonies. Thank you. Can I thank you very much, Councillor Harper. If you'd like to return to the public seating area, and we will continue with proceedings. So we obviously had a number of presentations. Now, are any questions that committee members have coming out of that? I had one which seemed to be one slight grey area, which was about the height of the tower, because reports seem to suggest that it had grown. We heard from the applicants that it hadn't. So it's really just to understand that point on the height of the highest element, the 26-storey element.
Chair, the height of the tower hasn't changed. So it's exactly the same height as it was before. Point was made about the height. It's actually 26 stories high. So obviously that exceeds the 20-story high limitation that's set up in the site allocation. It's just worth sort of bearing in mind that the site allocation really suggests a landmark building in this location. That would be, and that suggests 15 to 20 stories in height. It also suggests a local landmark at Portland Street, which is 10 to 15 stories in height. That's the FDS scheme. The FDS tower is currently 24 stories high, so that far exceeds that guidance in any case. So I guess the point there's a clear understanding of in the site allocation that there is an expectation for a landmark in this location.
And so there's a sort of yes or no question. You're saying there is precedent elsewhere on the Aylesbury for a tower that exceeds what's set out in the outline planning commission, and as well we've already previously taken the decision on this site allocation for a building that exceeds that height.
Indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Pula.
Cheers, Chair. So from what I've heard throughout the evening, it seems like there are a number of policies which may have been breached with this application, but it does still seem like balance. We are still being told or recommended to approve this application. And I can speak on that further when we get onto the last part of committee. What I wanted to quickly ask officers was that were considerations taken for alternative provisions of the site before it was accepted, that the applicant could put forward the building under London Plan H8C. Just because I did a further quick scan of the report and I couldn't find it, maybe I will be able to.
Yeah, so and the applicant made reference to this as well. It has been discussed previously in the meeting. So at 353, paragraph 353, and on the numbers report layout, page number 98, that talks about the work that was done, and obviously the objectors disputes the figures which have been arrived at of the embodied carbon associated with pre-construction demolition. So that goes to the point of you're knocking something down, and as was pointed out, and it's absolutely correct. There's already embodied energy, concrete and steel, dating back, to the 60s when the estate was built. So that was considered, and as part of that, and the applicant also made reference to this, that there was also consideration about the existing structure of the building, and again, both Councillor Harper and others have raised the issue that delay has not helped, but nonetheless, as a fact, that it is in a poor condition. So to go to the point, and Jed raised this from the Law Centre about before looking at demolition, have other options been looked at? Our view is yes, they have been considered in relation to this standing application, but also another very important material consideration is the consent from 2023 and also the outline planning permission, which authorised the demolition of the entire estate. And I think historically, in going through that process, one of the things which has been raised over the past years by objectors has been this point about refurbishing the estate. So we, as a local authority, have looked at that in a great deal of detail as part of the wider estate, and it has been looked at as part of this particular application as well. So our view would be that this meets that policy requirement in the London Plan.
Okay, further questions, Councillor Tester?
Thank you for that. I think the War Council has kind of raised a bit of a question about the wider regeneration of future phases, from the Outline Planning Commission, and what I wanted to get was a sort of a steer from officers about to what extent that is a material planning consideration, because obviously we are looking at this application, which is a standalone application. How much can we look to that sort of the feasibility, as it were, of the outline planning consent if we are approving something on top of that, if that makes sense. I think that would be a really useful kind of steer to get.
I think in the sense that the outline planning application from 2015 and the 23 permission, albeit not issued, both have looked at the same as existing buildings. I mean, there has been a change in their condition from 2015 onwards, as has been pointed out by objectors and all councillors and the applicants, and that condition has got considerably worse in that time. So the Outline Planning Commission and the 23 decision are very material to the consideration of this scheme. I think Jed from Southwark Law Centre points out quite correctly that you start with a plan and the plan policies, but as committee members are aware, you also have to take into account the material considerations and the relevant weight that they should be accorded in your consideration. And our view as officers is the relevant weight accorded is significant, both to the Outline Planning Commission and also to the 2023 decision. Bear in mind the 2023 decision was taken under the auspices of the 2022 Southwark Plan, the most up-to-date development plan in Southwark, and the 2021 London Plan. So both, relatively still up-to-date plans.
Yes, Councillor
Yeah, just ask a kind of point of clarification on that. So I think the question I'm trying to get at is if we were sort of minded to approve this application because it is a different sort of application to the 2023 one, would that mean that the outline planning consent is no longer valid? That's kind of the point I was trying to get
at. No, because if you approve this, at the point at which you approve it, a question about whether or not the existing outline planning permission was capable of still being valid, so not physically incompatible with this scheme, would only arise once this scheme was implemented. So at the point at which it was implemented, yes, there would then be a question about whether or not the outline planning permission is physically incompatible with this standalone application. In Dipesh's presentation, and as the applicant commented, this drop-in application fits with, we think, as officers within the rules, outline planning permission parameters. The green link was mentioned. Mike mentioned the site allocation and its requirements for some landmark towers on the site. The fact that the building is taller than the approved one, we don't think would make this physically incompatible with the outline planning permission. So our view would be, as officers, that at the point you make a decision tonight, that the outline planning permission just stays as is. On the implementation of this scheme, it would raise the question: does that make it physically incompatible with the outline planning permission? We don't think it would be. So our view is, we think that the outline planning permission would probably still be something that would be entirely valid, that you could implement if you wanted to. I think one further point to add is in terms of material consideration for you at this committee. Recent case law basically establishes that, and it's a long-held principle in planning, you can have planning permissions for different things on the same site. And what isn't a material consideration is for a committee, any committee, is which of those planning permissions might be implemented in the future, because none of us know. So it's legitimate to have two planning applications on the site, but for the consideration tonight, there isn't a necessity for you to, if you like, guess which one might be implemented. But as I say, our view is that the outline planning permission is not physically incompatible with this, because generally it's been designed very carefully to try and fit around the rest of the master plan.
Thank you. And I mean, clearly one of the things that has changed since we took our January 2023 decision is, I think it's this hillside judgment, isn't it? So because obviously that wasn't something that we were able to consider in January 2023, but obviously has happened now. So just to really understand a little bit more about that and what implication that has, that might be one for you, Claire.
Yeah, so Hillside establishes that well-known proposition that obviously a planning application obligation. It goes back to what Colin was saying, that you can absolutely have two planning applications for the same site. And those applications might very well be physically incompatible. Problem then, that is not a problem in itself, of course, of any number of planning applications on the site. Where down the line it might arise practically is if, of course, one of those planning applications is built out, it then makes the earlier one or the later one physically incompatible. So then you essentially lose the planning application that becomes physically incompatible. So what you had in Hillside was you had an original planning application from 1967, and it was it conditioned a master plan, and it said exactly where the roads had to go and exactly where the houses had to go. And then over the course of a number of decades, you had several other planning applications, drop-in applications, that substantially changed the scheme. Essentially, you had roads going where the original planning application said you should have had houses. So then what happened, because those later planning applications have been implemented, it was no longer possible to implement the original master plan from the 1997 scheme. So just kind of taking Hillside then and how you legally should approach the issue. So the starting point here is obviously, as has been said many times, you're dealing with a full new planning application, standalone application. And starting point, as I said, is it's possible to have several planning applications, even incompatible ones, on the site. So that's the point of departure. Then taking that then and looking at the outline planning permission in place doesn't strike me as a Hillside point, because you would have higher, or you would have the 5 to 6, 26-story building if planning permission is granted tonight. that wouldn't create a physical incompatibility with building out 2 to 20-story buildings, say, on the other site. And so when you have a planning application, of course, again, it doesn't implement. You can implement a planning application in whole or in part. So it strikes me, just on that physical incompatibility point, it would be possible to work around the other phases implemented by, granted by the outline, and you wouldn't have a physical incompatibility between those. But in any event, and with this site, obviously what is different to this with the Dennis case, the judicial review that's been referred to, the problem there was the fact that there was a section 96A non-material amendment application, which turned out to be a material amendment because it was trying to insert severability into the description. So we don't have a section 96A issue. That was the crunch issue in Dennis. So we're dealing with an entirely different issue now. We're not dealing with a section 73 condition amendment either. So none of those issues stand. It's really a standing alone application. So just I could give my views on the possibility for a hillside point and physical incompatibility. But even in the case of obvious physical incompatibility, so let's even consider we're in a hypothetical world where there's an obvious physical incompatibility. There's a recent case, Court of Appeal case from 2023. It's Fisk and Test Valley Borough Council. And that says that even when you've got a really obvious physical incompatibility, that's not a mandatory material consideration that the local planning authority is bound to take into account. That was a case where you had 2 full separate applications. So even if, which as I said, doesn't strike me in this case, there is an obvious physical incompatibility, it's not a mandatory material consideration. And that goes back to the points of you can have physically incompatible applications. It's up to the developer which one they want to implement. So potential incompatibility, not a mandatory material consideration. But the OPP, the existence of the OPP itself, is still capable, of course, of being a material consideration. And that's essentially because it creates a fallback position for the site as well, because you've got that possibility to choose between planning applications. So the OPP is a fallback if the phase 2B were granted tonight and weren't implemented. And then, of course, the OPP is obviously relevant because it creates a principle for development that is acceptable on the site and has been deemed so and granted so. So in terms of that, you'd be looking at consistency of decision making as well, in terms of taking the OPP that it's established as acceptable development and making sure that there's no sort of incompatibility of decision making there. So really, in short, to come back to, I think, what was your headline question, if the committee grants permission for the new full planning application, the OPP would absolutely still remain extant and relevant. It would then be up to the developer to choose which permission to implement, whole or in part. Does that help at all? I've tried to kind of break it down and sequence it, but I know it's a lot there. But if I can help further, do let me know.
Yes, please do. And I think that was quite complicated for people to get their heads around, but I thought it was also quite useful. And as I said, having had some of this discussed at meetings on this application, I think I'm clearer now than I was before, so that's helpful. Councillor Tester.
No, I'd say that was incredibly helpful. Thank you. I think sort of building on that, and I think I probably know what the answer is already, is that if we are in a situation where do think that further down the line there could be a kind of physical incompatibility, or even if there isn't, to what extent is kind of future phases of a kind of regeneration such as this a material consideration at all? If it's if we actually do you know what I mean? I kind of I wonder if you'd be able to give some sort of advice on that, because I can kind of see where you're sort of saying that actually because this would, even regardless of whether it is compatible or not with the outline planning consent, actually is that it is the viability of future phases actually something we should be considering in the first phase. Is that sort of something to keep considering?
The consideration in this case is the viability of this scheme at this moment in time. And the viability assessment from the applicant, which we've had reviewed, says that yes, this is a viable scheme to deliver at this moment in time. The potential implementation of any planning permission in the future, nobody knows. You know, it's not. Therefore, it's not a material consideration, because I mean, nobody can predict, what's going to happen in the future. We can, at this moment in time, make an assessment about the viability of this part of delivery, this part of the master plan, and subsequent parts of the master plan. We be doing the same thing, bring that back to you. But no planning officer or developer will ever be able to tell you what might happen 3, 4, 5 years in advance. We make plans to try and get to where we want to be, but we can't predict where we're going to get, where the economy will be, where funding for housing will be, all those things. So the decision on each case is on its own merits at the time that you make the decision.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any questions on other aspects of what we've heard we need to consider? Anybody wish to move forward in terms of that discussion about where they? Catherine, do you know?
I just wanted to give an indication then. There are lots of related issues that were discussed and aired tonight about the conduct of the applicant before us, or the organisation the applicant from, and the relationship with the council, and things that might have been in a context which is now past in that sense. I understand very clearly that we have to consider the standalone application that we have in front of us, and that is framed by an OPPP, which is not threatened or lost if this is granted. But what we do have in front of us, and one has to take the fact that the applicant is here and has requested permission to build out this scheme as a sign of good intent. And every application that we consider is based on that good intent. And we can't consider scenarios that we have no control over, or are not part of this quasi-judicial process of determining the application and information we've had. So on those grounds, as a standalone application and the provision it's seeking to deliver and how it's evolved since 2023, I would consider that this is a strong application with good design content that reflects the vernacular and quality of other forms of social housing and other housing tenure elsewhere in the area, and therefore there are grounds to consider this to be a strong application on the basis of the standalone information that we've got in front of us. But I also understand from your reference that it doesn't discount the OPP, and it is in line with the most up-to-date Southwark plan of 2022, and it is an evolution, albeit in terms of market conditions or a reflection of where they're at, of the 2023 application that was consented. Would that be a fair assessment of where we are?
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think I'm going to ask other committee members whether that is a view they share or they have differing views. I'm going to go to Councillor Fuller next.
Cheers, Chair. I am going to disagree with my colleague on the committee in terms of that. I do believe that if the scheme has passed the OPP and from what I've heard and seen here, there has been comments with regards to the good intent of the applicant. I think historically it's been noted that the previous scheme also on site was only with massive intervention from council, and frankly, do I believe they possibly build out in, as noted when he failed on that? Personally, I think not. Consideration here, but what is a failure of P2. That's been noted already on the papers here, but also a failure of also the London Plan AJ as well. That has also failed in this case. But I'm also not ignorant to the fact that there is a significant need in Zone 2 with regards to truly affordable social housing, especially family homes. And because of that, I do believe that we need a good quality scheme here. And unfortunately, my personal opinion, and from what I've heard tonight, with land being so scarce in this area, unfortunately, this does fail that threshold. And on that basis, I am minded.
Okay, I'm going to work down the table. I think Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with my colleague next to me. I think that the key test is, does this application make its contribution to the delivery of council and affordable homes in this scheme as part of the wider scheme? And I believe it does. We've heard that it does this evening. I do listen in these meetings generally, not just tonight, but generally, very carefully to the views of ward councillors, because ward councillors have a very important representative role, and they're often the most plugged in people in their local community. And that's why I offered not one but two opportunities to say whether or not ward councillors were in favour or against the application that we have before us tonight. And we got that kind of agnostic answer, but that's fair enough. But what I did hear very powerfully from the ward councillor was about the harm that delay was causing to local residents, and I think she spoke very powerfully about that. And that's where the views of a ward councillor come into their own, because when people are speaking to local residents on a regular basis, they do pick up that kind of harm in a way that perhaps is lost in other ways. I think it's absolutely clear to me that the environmental impact of this scheme needs to be considered in the long term. And I found the exchanges over the environmental impact, and in particular the comparison, that we are going to make comparisons inevitably with the options that were put forward by the objectors on refurbing this estate. It's clear to me that the greener option is going forward with new build with this application, and you have to look at that in the round. And I also think, going back to the kind of harm and the delay point as well, the design of the estate as it is, even refurbished, does introduce a huge amount of harm, because its fundamental design does not allow for safe living space and public spaces for the people on the estate. It just does not. And to say otherwise is to just simply ignore the evidence that we have before us. I think it's completely unequivocal. And so for those reasons, I'm minded to vote in favour of this scheme tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Whitton.
Yeah, this application is many we suffered through for the last 2 years. And we get a feel for them. Sorry, I have Parkinson's. It's very difficult for me to speak loudly. It's very hard to ignore people in the community with their views. But this is a very emotive application, and we must strip all the opinion away from it and look at fact. the fact that the OPP will not be compromised, the fact that it does almost comply with everything. No application does comply with everything, every policy. And I think it's very easy to throw bricks at these applications. But I think this is actually one of the better applications I've looked at. And it does consider the greenness of the environment. It does consider the embodied carbon. And it does consider the needs of the local population. And we can all say coulda, shoulda, woulda in terms of whether there's going to be challenges in either direction. I think we have to just look at the facts, look at the application as it stands, and I'm minded to approve.
Thank you. Councillor Tester.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to break form and say that I very much agree with the comments of my predecessor. And, you know, I can't draw on your long experience of having looked at these applications. I was not on the committee that looked at the 2023 application. This is the first time that I have been involved in one of these applications. And I think there seems to be a real challenge to me, at least in terms of understanding what it is that the community really do feel about the master plan as a whole, because to sometimes it seems as though they want the opportunity to kind of start again from scratch. Sometimes it seems that they're worried about the prospect of the master plan being delivered, and it does sort of seem a bit like kind of Schrodinger's planning consent to me, that I can't quite work out what it is that the community asks. And I think I've been really reassured by officers that actually that is a bit of a moot point in terms of what we're looking at here today, that we are really just looking at this application at hand. I think I completely agree that this application doesn't meet every single policy, but I have never sat on an application which does. I think, you know, looking at policy P2 and the housing mix, I understand that, yes, it doesn't meet what was set out, but also in the areas that do matter to us most in terms of delivering family size housing, which is on the social rent, it does for the most part. And I do feel as though actually that, like Councillor Rose said, that we do have to see that the applicant is doing this in good faith and is looking to deliver family size housing. I think, you know, also it seems to me that there is the principle of a development on this site as well, because it doesn't seem to me that the question about refurbishment is relevant for this application. I think it's an important debate to have, but I don't know if this application is where we have that debate. I think we have a precedent set that this site should be redeveloped and will be redeveloped. So I do think that that's not necessarily the time and space for it, although it is a very important conversation to be having. I think we've not really touched on the design itself. I think it actually looks quite nice. And I think I've sort of sat in quite a few applications now for where they're looking at tall buildings where the buildings aren't the most attractive. They're sort of just fine. I think this actually does look very nice, and I think it would be a lovely place to live. And I am not a resident of the Aylesbury estate, and I probably never will be a resident of the Aylesbury estate as it currently stands, but I do think that this looks like a substantive improvement and would give residents who are kind of living there currently, who have lived there in the past and want to return, a better quality of life and a better place to call their own than what is there at the moment. So I do think that on balance I would have to support the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Merrill.
Try not to repeat what other people have gone through many times here, and I've been sat here quite quiet listening to this. Now, I've been a councillor now for coming up to 16 years, lived in the area a very long time, know the Aylesbury very well, and know, you know, what residents have been through over the years since you mentioned the elections in 2001 when you decided whether to, and they were opposed to the demolition and all that's gone on. But we have to not look at the history. We have to look at the application as it is today. We don't even look at the applicant, really. There have been problems with the applicant, been problems with the way Southwark Council dealt with this scheme. But this is the application here today to look at, and what it will do for the residents in that area that need these homes quite desperately. Now, I've taken on board carbon footprint and where that comes forward and that. And yes, ideally, would, you know, retrofit, redo, and that, but it wouldn't bring it to a standard that I would want my son to live in the future. And that's what I look at the moment. How our children will be, what they will be, we will be leaving them to live in. Quite understand the environmental issues. I quite understand that we want to leave a better planet for us. But we also want to live even with an environment they would want to live in well. I don't believe, as it stands, this area of the estate would want to be lived in. People have to live in there at the moment. They don't particularly want to live in. So we're developing this estate, and I've never, I've been on planning since 2010, with a few breaks here and there, never seen a perfect application. In fact, I've seen, people argue to try to get the applications have fallen for the pursuit of perfection, which will never be achieved. But this is as close as we can get it for this particular application. So I will be minded to approve it as it stands.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a few comments myself. I mean, first of all, actually, what I do want to say from the outset is I've been quite impressed by the quality of the presentations actually we've had from all sides in this. Objectives from the applicants, particularly Ward Council, I think very strong and powerful points about, I think, concerns particularly about the delay and the blight that has on the community there. And I hope and we did hear that the applicants do want to get on and build this. So I hope they've heard those words very clearly from the Ward Councils about their concerns about delays. And if we are to approve, that they take note of that and do make progress as quickly as they can. I mean, lots of people have said there's no such thing as a perfect application, and I think there are obviously things here which are not perfect. However, one of the things I do note is it's rare for us to have an application in front of us that's completely compliant in terms of play space on a development, and the fact that this is, I think, is certainly something to be welcomed, and I know the council as well pointed that out as something that was of merit. I do want to say a few things. A number of people have referenced the London plan, and we do have in our report very clearly at paragraph 379 at 380 what the GLA's view on this is, and they are supportive of this. And clearly, if there were things that were such massive concerns about this in terms of the London plan, the GLA would be saying something very different. I do think if we do need to consider that the GLA's own view as the owners of the London plan are that this is a development that they indeed welcome. And I do think we need to be mindful of that in their advice. Clearly, there are some issues that have been raised about bedroom mix, but I think we have heard that point that we are getting bedroom mix in the appropriate proportions or above the appropriate proportions when it comes to social housing against policy. And we've heard the issues from the developer about the viability, about trying to get people to buy bedroom homes and the challenge that is on the private market. I think we all understand that point as well. And again, retrofitting, I think, is certainly something that needs to be always explored and considered for estate redevelopments. And indeed, I've certainly pushed that in my own ward in 2 different estates, one of which was successful but very expensive, and one which ended up not being successful and took quite a lot of time to get resolved to a point where that was the case. And so there are always challenges with these things, and it's not always the easy alternative, I think, sometimes to put forward. And it's clear that there has been thought about this. I do know in the past, as part of the development of the master plan in the first place, that it was discounted because of the cost of what retrofitting would make. And I think, that we need to consider that when we're talking about that issue in terms of how these things have been considered. And I do think, we do need to come back to that point that I made earlier, that this is not compromising the objective of delivering a target number of social housing on the site. And indeed, we've heard it's assisting getting there. So certainly on that basis, I would agree with other members of the committee that they would support the application. So given that, I'd like to move to the recommendation. So I would like to move that Planning Commission is approved for that we adopt the officer's recommendations as set out in paragraphs 1 to 6 of the report on page 16 of the agenda pack. Firstly, the Planning Commission be granted, subject to conditions, the applicant entering into the appropriate legal agreement and the referral to the Mayor of London. Secondly, the environmental information be taken into account as required by Regulation 26(1) of the Town and Country Planning, Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017 as amended. And thirdly, the Planning Committee, in making a decision, has due regard to potential equalities impacts that are outlined in the report. And fourthly, that following the issue of Planning Commission, Director of Planning and Growth writes to Secretary of State notifying them of the decision pursuant to Regulation 31A of the Town and Country Planning Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017, and fifthly, that following the issue of Planning Commission, Director of Planning and Growth place a statement on the Statutory Register pursuant to Regulation 28(1) of the Town and Country Planning Act, Environmental Impact Assessment Regulations 2017, which contains information required by Regulation 28, and for the purposes of Regulation 28(1)H, being the main reasons and considerations on which the Planning Committee's decision was based, shall be set out in this report. And finally, that in the event of the requirements of Part 1 not being met by the 30th of September 2025, the Director of Planning Growth be authorised to refuse Planning Permission if appropriate for the reasons set out in paragraph 369 of this report. Does any member wish to second this? Or Councillor Tester, thank you. We'll now take a vote on this. So Councillor Whittam.
For Chair.
Councillor Edwards.
For Chair.
Councillor Merrill.
Chair.
Councillor Papula.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Rose.
For Chair.
Councillor Tester.
For Chair.
I'm Councillor Richard Livingstone. I'm also voting for that. The motion is carried and permission is granted. That brings us to an end of today's meeting. I wish you all a safe journey home. Take care.